diverse range of people, which I'm quite excited about hearing from. So we've got, the police, legal, we've got a representative from youth, we've got lived experience, and we've got someone from the Office of Women Violence and Prevention. So now is the time to get into solution making. What I really want to discuss today are the biggest challenges in preventing homelessness in your worlds. Now, I think from my perspective, I can see all of the momentum happening. The last 5 years, we've seen a lot of reports and recommendations, and it's really overwhelming for me, personally, to really cut through as to exactly what is happening. We've got the Queensland Women's Strategy report. We've got the Not Now, Not Ever report. It had 140 recommendations. We've got the Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Strategy. We've got the Prevent, Support, Belief Queensland Framework. We've got a task force report of another 89 recommendations. And so I think so you can see it's actually where we're trying to get to is exactly what is happening that is going to make a difference. Also introduced around Queensland, just to reflect on, we've got new specialist DFV courts, we've got new integrated high-risk response service teams, we've got new shelters for women and children popping up everywhere, we've got new women's safety and a justice task force. So what I'm going to do is really cut to the chase and actually just ask each of you from your perspective, what is the one significant action happening in your world that you believe that will help women in domestic and family violence situations to empower them to live safely and to leave safely from their situation? I'm going to actually throw to you, Cindy, first, because you are incredible, what you have done after having your own lived experience and experiencing, I guess, when you left, what happened. Can you tell us, why you have created what you've created and, what is the significant action?
Well, the action that we're creating with Little Bug Love is in police stations, and that's comforting our children of domestic violence while they're there. It's distracting them from those adult conversations and that trauma getting deeper and deeper with every statement. My daughter was with me and she was 11 and turning 12 during our experience, and we reported over 1,800 breaches in the first 2 months we were in hiding. And it wasn't until Vic actually asked us to be on this panel that I started to realise that 2 months of hiding wasn't hiding. We were homeless. That's only occurring to me now. I've realised that because I was fighting every day to get back to my home, I didn't realise I was homeless till this year. Just saying, thanks. You're welcome. But do you know what I mean? Because you live it, you experience it so differently, you don't see it as clearly as everybody else. So the space we're creating not only comforts and distracts those kids from further trauma, it'll stop mum from censoring herself, because I did. There was some things that were sent through to my phone that my daughter will never ever hear, and so the police didn't hear because she was with me. So by being able to just comfort and distract these children and put them in headphones on a tablet, we're giving mum more room to not censor herself, to disclose. We're making it easier for the police to do their job, get them in, get those statements and get them out to somewhere. So that's what we're doing with Little Bug Love.
Amazing. Brian, from the police situation, so Cindy has, reflected on when she actually turned up to the police station. What is the one significant action that's happening in your world?
There's significant stuff. I don't know if you've been reading the papers. There's a fair bit going on in this space at the moment. Can I say in the time that we're going to be here, in this 40 minutes, there'll be another 11 DV-related occurrences across this state as we speak. There are 89 recommendations that come out of the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force. The QPS has been given the lead on 7. I think DJAG have been given an inordinate number, about 68.
I've got 4 of my own.
Can I say, I'm going to be a little provocative. 4 of those recommendations are about primary prevention. 4. And 3, I think, relate to an already existing, quite successful program in education, which is respectful relationships. When we get involved, it's too late. I'm sorry, but what we've just spoken about is all about response. And we've got a critical part to play in that. I'm not hiding from that. We will always have a critical part to play at the time of crisis. But why should all the effort be in the response? And here we are talking about homelessness, and forgive me because I'm probably speaking to the converted. Why is it that women, predominant victim, I'm not playing games with gender and all the rest of it, we can all play to the exceptions, and the exceptions do exist. Why are they the ones leaving homes with their kids? Where are the options to find alternative pathways for men? The perpetrators. And I am already hearing about innovative practice, even in some of our most isolated and First Nations communities, where they are taking the ball up with innovative ideas about places for the men to go so that it's not the women and the children leaving their place of safety. You asked me a question, I didn't answer it. The answer is probably this one. What do I see that's happening? We are, for the first time in a long, long time, talking together. And I'm now engaged with Amanda's team and with our HRTs in integrated response. This is not going to be fixed by police. It's not going to be fixed by anybody alone. And for me, I think we're on the threshold of an opportunity to really come together and deal with this from woe to go. And that's what I'm excited about. Thank you.
Julie, legally, what is the one?
Okay, I have to agree with the previous speakers. It is a really exciting time in Queensland in relation to the many advances that are happening and the recommendations and report and the focus that currently we have on domestic violence and especially coercive control. I'm a lawyer. I agree with what the previous speakers have said in relation to it's beholden on all of us to work together, and then nothing can happen if we don't work together. I'm quite keen on laws that articulate the standard which we want to hold each other and ourselves and the community to. So whilst I might have a bias towards laws, I still believe that the impact of actually having the law, the impact of developing the law and having the conversations about what law should be there is a process of community awareness, community education and community transformation. So I know that the law's not going to do it, police response not going to do it, but it actually does engage people in a conversation. And we are all the better for having these conversations about what is domestic violence, what is respectful relationships, what is coercive control, because until we actually started talking about potentially having a law that had that, we were actually still quite naive, in my view. Because, believe you me, the definition of coercive control has been in the Domestic Violence Act for years. So it's actually about going, hey, let's talk about it, and this is a way that we can talk about it. So what Women's Legal Service has been doing, and really, I do think that we're on the precipice of really quite seismic community and cultural change. And I hope I'm not being too naive, but I'm a little bit stubbornly optimistic. At the moment, as we speak, Brian and I have been involved in the Commission of Inquiry into Police cultural attitudes and their responses to domestic violence. So that's one part of the pie, the complex puzzle here. We've got the Hear Her Voice that has come out of the task force of the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force. Very, very comprehensive, looks at the state, interstate and national responses to domestic violence, really drills down to the cultural issues that enable a culture of the domineering and the frightening coercive control to happen in a private relationship, but not only that, but not even be identified by the victim. I think that's really huge. So we've got those recommendations. Today there was an announcement that DV Connect was getting more funding. We've got 10 days of paid leave for people who are domestic violence survivors. we're on the precipice of the first tranche of the coercive control recommendations being rolled out, and they are about including a more expansive understanding of what domestic violence actually is. So I could list many, many things. I personally am always excited when people say, let's actually turn this into a law, because it says to me the community has had enough, that they actually do want some consequences. Thank you.
Amanda, so you're leading integrated response teams for high-risk victims around the state. What do you see changing?
Well, I not so much changing, I think continuing. So the integrated service response that we're starting to see, and that was out of Not Now, Not Ever, government introduced high-risk teams. So the high-risk team brings together QPS, corrections, health, a lead in non-government organisation specialising in domestic violence, and those services working together and, importantly, sharing information about our victim and her children in a safe space allows hope. Well, we are very comfortable that we have saved many lives through the high-risk teams and the integrated service response over the years. It's really hard to put a number on, but you know, there are many women who have been moved safely into refuge and then through to housing, and housing are just such an important part on our integrated service response team.
Rachel, from your perspective, on the ground in Logan, and you know, talking to young girls every day, what do you see as the biggest action that's making change?
Yeah, I think in this space there's been a stronger push for consent education, particularly in the last 2 years, which is great to see. And I think that's well overdue. I think my team and I have been doing this work for more than 5 years now. And before that, there was no service provider or option available to schools to contact to do this work. And often teaching staff feel unequipped or uncomfortable to hold those conversations with young people. So I find that emphasis and that switch of making it a priority is really good, but we can't just say it's a priority and then not follow it up. I think that there needs to be an emphasis on connecting schools to adequate service providers, and also allowing young people to have access to those resources. We know that young people in Logan, not everyone has access to, they just can't jump on a bus down the road to their local service provider. They may not be able to pick up the phone. So what's practical for them in that sense? But yeah, particularly I think the push for consent education is great to see, but that does need to be followed up by some more, I would say, solid action.
Thank you. I'm actually going to just switch to an observation that I made that I had recently that made me feel really uncomfortable. And it was the coroner's report for the Hannah Clark case. And the statement was made that nothing could have been done to prevent her death. Now that really impacted me. And Brian, I want to hear from you.
I respect the coroner's decisions, but let me tell you this, I can't look in Lloyd and Sue's faces and say, as a member of a police department that's tasked with protecting our community, and say to you that I'm going to accept and be satisfied with that outcome. It may well be that the system made it very difficult for us to pick up on the indicators that we should have been alive to. It may have been that the system prevented us from taking action in the way that we might want to happen to. But that's not an acceptable answer as to us being able to do what we need to do to prevent these from happening again. So I guess that's the challenge. Let's change the bloody system. Because we have to learn more and more about these indicators early in the piece. And it's incredibly complex, but being complex isn't an excuse for not doing it. So, you know, from my perspective, I understand what the coroner said within that system. It may have been difficult. But as your member of your police department, I'm not going to accept that, and we're going to keep trying hardest to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Cindy, from your perspective, what can change?
Well, I really appreciate that from Brian's perspective, that he doesn't accept that as a police officer. Like, I really appreciate that. But being on the other side of that, I found out during our court process that I was probably the 7th or 8th woman that this man has done this to, and he's unstoppable. It's that simple. He is an insidious disease, and every time he's done this to someone, he's learning more from the justice system on what he can do and can't do next time. And that's how he keeps going and going. Even during our court process, he was bringing new girlfriends to that. Some people aren't going to be stopped, and I'm so sorry, because I know that that's not what anybody wants to hear. It's not what I wanted to hear. But nobody could stop this man. The police, fortunately in our case, they were amazing. I cannot fault the police. They showed up every single time and they did the best for us. And the day that the courts let this man out on bail, the police officers rang me in tears because I was halfway home and they told me to turn around. I couldn't go home. He'd just been released. And they were as distraught as I was. And there was nothing that could be done until he breached again and put himself in a position where he could be caught, because he was a master of hiding. He couldn't be stopped.
So Julie, from a legal perspective, so let's talk about the law and how it's being implemented at a community level, at the grassroots, to help keep women safe. What are the most recent legislative changes that are happening to protect against coercive control?
Well, as I said, the state government has already announced the rollout after really comprehensive community education, training, support and resourcing, the criminalisation of coercive control. So that will be happening next year. And really importantly, all of the evidence from other jurisdictions shows that that offence is only successfully litigated if there has been a background in high investment of training, resourcing and support. That if we just lob a new law in, it is ineffective. So I'm just so encouraged that, that in my view at least, the state government is actually doing it the right way, in the right order. Having said that, I should also point out that whilst we continue to expect women to leave their houses with the children, there is still going to be a bias for women to say, I won't leave now, I can't leave now, it'll be too disruptive on me, but mostly the kids. And whilst we have a family law system that still has a presumption of equal shared parenting, perpetrators will continue to control victims and women by saying, I'll take the kids. I'll take the kids, I'll have them 50-50. Right? Now, please don't underestimate how frightening that is for a woman with her kids, knowing that if she leaves, she's actually going to probably be asked by a court to leave the kids with him unsupervised. I can't even tell you how many women I've spoken to who've said, it is better for me to be there because at least I'm keeping an eye on him. So this is not a one-size-fits-all answer. I'm a lawyer, so I'm always going to go to the laws. What do the laws say and how can we use them better? And how do they need to change to make things safer? So there's just a couple of examples.
Amanda, do you have anything to add to that with your experience?
I was just going to reflect, if we go back to our survivor story that was so beautifully told earlier in the morning, there were 3 mentions in that story about her safety plan. And I am really pleased that the Queensland Government has just reviewed our common risk and safety framework, and that tool is going viral, hopefully. That's my plan. So we will have common language around that safety plan, and it will travel with her and it will move as her situation moves. And I think that's going to be eyes on the perpetrator. And I do sort of agree with the coroner. He was a baddie. They're hard to manage, but let's have eyes on him. Let's know what he's doing, and let's make her plan really focused on her and the children, but keep an eye on him as well.
Thank you. I'm going to open the floor up to questions now for this panel. I'm sure there are questions in the audience.
Okay, hang on, I'll pass this one here.
Sorry, just
Piggyback on what you've just said there with keeping eyes on him, how would you pose that as a suggestion? Because if there is no, and I'm not sure perhaps others can weigh in on this, if there's no legal precedent at that point in time to be keeping eyes on him, who does that and how do we kind of get that information back to the services that are working with her?
Well, I think in Cindy's example, she had excellent police who were on the ground and rang her. He's out of remand or he's on parole. But what we have is a lot of women who aren't connected to their police officer, they're not connected to corrections. So what the integrated response does and what the safety tool does is says to corrections, hey, when he's remanded, you've got to ring her or you've got to ring her service. So I think that, and you can do it. The legislation says you must share that information. We're never going to make the courier mail because we didn't tell them, he was out on parole. We're going to save her life potentially. Turning around the car is the perfect example. So I think what we really want to see in Queensland, and it sort of goes to to the whole crux of this panel, how do we make her safe? We make her safe by giving her the power to make her plan, but giving her some extra tips. But yeah, putting eyes on him. And look, corrections aren't on this panel, but they are really working super hard as well and working out that they need to work with other agencies like health, like housing. So, and I can see Brian nodding. In the 5 years I've been here since Not Now, Not Ever, we have seen real change. And I think sometimes we can reflect on what is negative or what is bad. But just last week I was in Bundaberg and Rockhampton and I met with our refuges. And both of them had stories of women exiting refuge to housing because housing have prioritised women with domestic and violence situations. So, they are wonderful stories and we need to celebrate those.
Any other questions?
Can I add to that though, with the spirit of not bringing it down, and it's a really good question. So let's face a few facts. There's 125,000 domestic family violence orders in place in Queensland right now. Now, what we know is only a relatively small number of those are likely to go on to present a serious escalation in the terms that have got so much quite understandable publicity. We don't have the capacity to monitor 125,000 orders. So what we need to do is work together as best we can to work on better tools to help identify and understand those who present with the most serious high risk and high harm. And invest significantly our scarce resource, and I'm not just talking about the police department, all of us, the scarce resources in the direction where it might best be an intervention and understand that. There's been discussions around having the registers, and I'll leave the legal minds, etc., as to whether that's appropriate. But we've been comparing it to the CPAW register, the Child Protection or the Child Offenders Register. Well, there's about 3,000 or 4,000 of those in the state. If we're talking about a similar register, we've got to understand this scourge that we're talking about is endemic. It's endemic in our community. It's not an outlier, and it has to be approached in a different way than if it is an outlier. And that means an investment from all of us, and that's why I'm encouraged by it. And can I take the point? Calling it out and calling it a law by its very nature, even if it's going to be difficult to prosecute or convict on, by stating it that we as a community do not stand for it so much so that it's now against the law is a powerful message. Yeah, thanks.
And I'd just like to say, just to kind of follow on from that question, what has been really showing some very, very positive results in terms of turning domestic violence perpetration around has been community and policing working together and basically saying to perpetrators, if you want help, because we think you do, here's the community response, here are the services. If you don't want help, even though we think you do, here's the police, and they're going to be popping in and seeing you. They're actually just going to randomly turn up. And they will charge you when you text and pretend it's just contact for the kids. You know what I mean? So it actually does, there are strategies that work, but I do really agree that we do need to be working together, and it does need to be something that we're always calling out. That we're not going, well, he doesn't have a domestic violence order, so it mustn't be domestic violence. we know, we can see when someone's a standover or when they're a bully. We can, ever
But
since
not
we
many
were
women
kids.
can. Not many women in that relationship see it like
But
that.
other people do.
Yeah,
But other
that's
people
right.
can see it.
And because we're starting a new relationship and we're caught up in that moment and we're compromising, we're finding out how we fit into each other's lives. By the time we realise we're in an abusive relationship, something bad's happened and we've turned around and gone, how did we get here?
Yeah.
And
But
that's
often
when
people
we
around-
realise, not until then.
Yeah, but often people around can see it.
We don't listen
yes,
to them.
yeah. But,
know better.
But they've always got friends. They're not by themselves. You know, they've got co-workers. They've got friends. They've got family.
You isolate yourself a lot.
Yeah.
Women do that. We isolate ourselves and insulate that because we want to fix it and we don't want everybody else knowing that we're trying to fix that. And my thing now is after our DV experience, I'm never fixing anyone again. You need fixing, fix yourself. Not my problem. And because I was raised to be a fixer and that's caused this pattern of these relationships. You know, when you're a kid, no, you'll be right, just fix it, just fix it, just fix it. And it's who I became. I became a fixer and now, no, fix yourself. I'm done.
We've got a question down the back.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on something you raised, Brian, and the others, why it's always the woman that has to move. Is there anything in the new legislation or anything that we're pushing that we can have a system where the bloke moves?
In the DV Act at the moment, there is actually provisions for ouster orders, and an ouster order is exactly what it sounds like. It's like the judge saying, you need to move out. So we have that in our domestic violence order. The interesting thing about that is that there are always exceptions. And so, for example, one of the things that the court has to consider is, does he have anywhere else to live? And I've actually been in court where this happens. And he'll go, no, I don't have anywhere else to live. And so the court will go, well, okay, he can stay there. And you've just got to be of good behaviour towards each other. So I think we do have the powers to get the perpetrator to move out, but then also think about who's the person who's most likely to be earning an income if it's a family with young children. So even if he moves out, can she afford to pay the mortgage? Then when it comes to family court, he's going to say, I'm going to have the kids half the time, I'm not going to pay the mortgage. So nothing is as simple as we expect. So it's a great question, but that's actually the answer legally.
Thank you. Where I was heading is we're a housing provider for older single women and women and kids out of DV. Do I start to look at a model to send the blokes to?
Can I say, I think absolutely. Do you know, there's something that I remember when I was the Assistant Commissioner for South East Region, so that was the Gold Coast and Logan between 2015 and 18. I started at the Gold Coast 4 days after Tara Brown's death, and there was a sequence of horrific tragedies there. We shouldn't call them tragedies because we should be stopping them. There's no doubt about it. I remember listening to a radio program there at the time, and there was a victim of DV who, in fact, was railing against this, that she wanted to stay at home and didn't want to go to a shelter or alternative provision of accommodation. And she really set me back on my heels when she said, because at least when she's home, she was in control of an environment and she knew where he was. But when she went to alternate premises, there was the extra layer of not now knowing where he was and not being in control. So I share Julie's view. This is so complicated and so complex. Can I tell you another thing? Do you know that we can send a couple of police officers at the moment to a life-threatening situation out there and have to make choices about whether they take a life? 2 young officers. But to ouster somebody, we have to get senior sergeant approval from somewhere in the state. There are so many levels of bureaucracy and administration around this, which is also what we've got to look at to simplify the responses. Thank you.
Thanks.
And if I can just add, I think if we do consider her, these women, like Cindy has explained, have had years of just being told they are rubbish, they can't pay bills, they can't do this. So at least when they go into refuge and they're really supported, they don't come out until they can take on that head lease, till they can pay the bills, really feel strong, have employment. So I do think if you've got capacity though to have room for him to move, that is a need, but we do have to be mindful of her and the years often that she's dealt with, just horrific kind of coercive control.
All right, well, I think we have just about run out of time, and I think, wow, you've all made such an impact then. Would you please put your hands together for such a powerful lineup of speakers?